They laughed when I walked into that party alone. My so-called friends made a joke out of my empty seat, out of my empty hand, out of my whole life. They wanted me to feel small. But they had no idea who was about to walk through that door for me. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want you to subscribe to this channel, because stories like mine deserve to be heard, and I promise you, by the end of this one, you're going to believe again that your season is coming too. Turn on the bell, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's get into it. My name is Kareen Hale, and for most of my life, I did everything the way I was supposed to. I worked hard. I paid my bills on time. I showed up for people even when they didn't show up for me. I wasn't chasing a fairy tale. I just wanted peace and maybe, somewhere down the road, a love that didn't cost me my dignity to keep. I was 32 years old, working as an office coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company, living in a small one-bedroom apartment that I decorated with things I found on clearance, because I refused to go into debt trying to impress people who weren't even paying my rent. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I was just a woman trying to build a life brick by brick, on my own terms, in my own time. 2 years before that party, I had gone through a relationship that left me hollow. I don't like to relive all the details, but I'll say this. I learned the hard way that a man can smile at you every single day and still be lying to your face. When it ended, I promised myself I wouldn't rush into anything just to fill a seat at somebody's table. I wanted real, and real takes time. My mother, Miss Dottie, used to tell me something I carried with me every day after that breakup. She'd say, don't let anyone make you feel small for being patient with your own life. Fruit doesn't rush the season, neither should you. I held onto those words the way some people hold onto scripture. I didn't know yet how much I would need them. I had two close friends at the time. Renee, who I had known since college, and Yvonne, who came into the group a few years later through Renee. On the outside, we looked like the kind of friendship you'd want. We took photos together, we celebrated birthdays, we sent each other memes at 2 in the morning. But if I'm being completely honest with you, there was always an undertone with Yvonne, a way she had of complimenting you and cutting you down in the very same sentence. Renee used to see it too, and sometimes she'd pull me aside and say, "Girl, don't mind her, that's just how she is." But somewhere along the way, instead of Renee defending me from that energy, she started laughing along with it, and I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being sensitive. Looking back now, I understand that I was just used to shrinking myself to keep the peace. There's one more person I need to tell you about before I get to the party, and it's someone you won't understand the importance of until much later in this story. About 8 months before that night, I was leaving work late after a long shift. It was cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones, and as I walked toward the train station, I noticed a man sitting on the ground near the entrance, wrapped in a thin jacket that wasn't made for that kind of weather. He wasn't asking anyone for anything. He was just sitting there, quiet, like a man who had given up on being noticed. I don't know what came over me that night, but I stopped. I asked him if he was hungry, and he looked up at me like nobody had spoken to him in days. I walked him to the little diner on the corner, bought him a hot meal, sat with him while he ate, and we talked. He didn't tell me much about himself, just that he was going through a hard season and needed to think clearly away from everyone who knew him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to know his story to know he deserved kindness. Before I left, I gave him the rest of the cash in my wallet, which wasn't much, but it was what I had. He thanked me and I told him something simple. Whatever you're going through, it's not the end of your story. Then I went home and honestly I forgot about it, or I thought I did. Now back to the party, it was Priscilla's engagement celebration. Priscilla was a mutual friend in our wider circle, someone who had just gotten engaged to a man from a wealthy family, and she wanted a night that would be remembered. She rented out the top floor of a beautiful venue downtown, hired a live band, had champagne towers, the whole production. The theme, if you could call it that, was success and love. Everyone was supposed to come looking their best, celebrating whatever chapter of life they were in. I almost didn't go. Something in my spirit told me that room wasn't going to be kind to me that night, but Renee kept texting, saying I needed to get out of the house, that I couldn't keep hiding from life just because things hadn't worked out with the last relationship. So I got dressed. I put on a deep emerald dress I had saved for a special occasion, did my makeup myself, and told my reflection in the mirror that I was walking into that party as a whole woman, not a woman waiting to be completed by somebody else. But the moment I stepped into that room, I felt it. The way a few eyes moved to me and then to the door behind me, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. The way Yvonne's smile stretched just a little too wide when she said, "Oh, look who decided to come alone again." I laughed it off because that's what we do, isn't it? We laugh off the little cuts so people don't see how deep they land. For the first hour, it was manageable. I mingled, I complimented Priscilla on her ring, I danced a little with some of the other guests. Odell, one of the few genuine people in that circle, a friend I'd known through work who had no patience for cruelty dressed up as jokes, stayed near me most of the night, and I was grateful for him. But then Yvonne decided the party needed a game. She stood up with a glass of champagne in her hand, tapped it with a spoon until the room quieted, and announced that every woman there was going to stand up, one by one, and share what she called her success story of the year. Career wins, relationship milestones, engagements, anything worth celebrating. It sounded harmless on the surface, but I knew the second she looked at me while she said it exactly what she was doing. One by one, women stood up and shared their stories. A promotion here, a new house there, an engagement, a pregnancy announcement that made the whole room gasp with joy. The energy built and built, and I felt my chest tightening with every turn that passed, because I knew mine was coming, and I had nothing shiny to hold up in that room full of shine. When it got to me, Yvonne turned with a look I will never forget, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath, and said, "Kareen, honey, what about you? You've been awfully quiet all year. No promotion, no ring, nothing to report." And she laughed, this light little laugh that told the whole room it was okay to laugh too. And they did, not everyone, but enough. Enough that I felt the heat rise up my neck and into my face. Renee, my supposed best friend, didn't say a word to stop it. She just sipped her drink and let out a small laugh of her own, like she was more concerned with fitting into that moment than standing beside me in it. I remember trying to open my mouth to say something light, something that would let me laugh it off too, but nothing came out smooth. I stammered something about being focused on myself this year, and someone in the back muttered just loud enough for a few people to hear, "That's what they all say." More laughter. I felt like the walls of that beautiful room were closing in on me, like every string of lights above us was a spotlight aimed only at my humiliation. I excused myself as gracefully as I could, said I needed the restroom, and I walked away from that circle with my head high because I refused to let them see me crumble in front of them. But the second that restroom door locked behind me, I crumbled anyway. I stood there in that marble bathroom in my emerald dress, mascara starting to blur at the corners of my eyes, and I let myself cry, quiet, careful, the kind of crying you do when you don't want anyone to hear you falling apart. I thought about every year I had spent trying to build something honest for myself. I thought about the heartbreak I had survived and how proud I was of myself for not rushing into something fake just to have a story to tell at a party. And in that moment, none of that felt like enough. I heard my mother's voice in my head again. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for being patient with your own life." I took a breath, wiped my eyes, fixed my makeup as best I could, and told myself I was going to walk back out there with my shoulders straight, even if my heart was still shaking. But right before I opened that door, I heard voices just outside it. Renee and Yvonne standing near the hallway, clearly not realizing how close I was. "She looks so pathetic up there," Yvonne said, laughing. "I almost feel bad, almost." And then Renee, the woman I had called my best friend for over a decade, said the words that cut deeper than anything Yvonne had said all night. "Honestly, it's kind of sad watching her pretend she's fine being alone. Some people just aren't meant for that kind of happiness." I stood frozen behind that door, my hand on the handle, feeling something inside me break quietly, not loudly, just a slow crack like glass under pressure. I didn't cry again. I think I had moved past crying into something heavier, something quieter. I waited a few minutes until I heard their voices fade back into the party, and then I stepped out, straightened my dress, and walked back into that room like nothing had happened. Odell noticed immediately that something was wrong. He didn't ask questions in front of everyone, he just came and stood beside me and said quietly, "You don't owe this room your tears. Whenever you're ready, we can leave." I told him I just needed a minute, and he stayed close, not hovering, just present, the way real friends do. I was seriously considering leaving early, gathering my things and slipping out before anyone noticed, when suddenly the entire energy of the room shifted. I remember it happening almost instantly, like someone had turned the volume down on the whole party. People near the windows started whispering and pointing outside, where a long black car had just pulled up in front of the venue. Priscilla, practically glowing with excitement, hurried over and told a small group of us that her fiancé's family had arranged a surprise. Someone important, someone rarely seen at events like this, had been invited and was actually coming. She wouldn't say who, just that it was a name that would make the whole room stop. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was still nursing the wound from the game, still replaying Renee's words in my head, still trying to figure out how I was going to survive the rest of that night with any dignity left. But then the doors opened, and the room did exactly what Priscilla said it would do. It stopped. A man walked in, dressed in a dark tailored suit that looked like it cost more than everything in my apartment combined, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every single person in that room. Whispers moved through the crowd like electricity. Someone near me said his name under their breath, Elias Grant, and I watched people's faces change, recognizing a name I honestly didn't know at the time, a name attached to investments in companies and a fortune most of us couldn't begin to imagine. But I knew his face. It hit me slowly, like my mind didn't want to believe what my eyes were telling me. The sharp jaw, the tired eyes that now looked rested and clear. The way he carried himself, different now, powerful now, but underneath all of it, unmistakably the same man I had sat with in that diner 8 months earlier. The man who had nothing that night except a thin jacket and a story he didn't want to tell. I stood there completely still, my heart pounding so loud I was sure Odell could hear it beside me. I told myself it couldn't be him. Surely I was imagining it, surely grief and humiliation were playing tricks on my mind. But then his eyes moved across that crowded room, past Priscilla who was already stepping forward to greet him, past the important guests who were straightening their posture hoping to be noticed, and landed directly on me. And he smiled, not a polite smile for a stranger. A smile of recognition. He walked straight past Priscilla's outstretched hand, past the small crowd that had already begun forming around him hoping for introduction, and he walked directly toward me. I heard the room's whispers shift into confusion. I saw Yvonne's face drain of color from across the room. I saw Renee's mouth actually fall open. He stopped in front of me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he said softly, just for me at first, "You probably don't remember me the way I remember you." I told him I remembered exactly who he was. He smiled again, and then he turned slightly, addressing the room, because apparently he wanted everyone to hear what he was about to say. He told them about a night 8 months earlier, one of the hardest nights of his life, a night he had walked away from everything. His company, his responsibilities, the pressure of being a man, everyone expected greatness, from because he needed to disappear and remember who he was outside of his success. He told them how he sat on cold concrete outside a train station, invisible to hundreds of people who walked past him that night, until one woman stopped. One woman who didn't know his name, didn't know his net worth, didn't know anything about him except that he looked like he needed someone to see him. He said I bought him a meal I couldn't really afford to buy, sat with him without judgment, gave him the last of the money in my wallet, and told him his story wasn't over. He said those words followed him for months afterward, through decisions that changed the direction of his company, through moments he almost gave up, through nights he almost let the weight of his own name crush him. He told the room that after that night, he made it his mission to find me again, not out of pity, not out of some savior complex, but because he had never in his life met someone who gave so freely with absolutely nothing to gain. He said it took him weeks to track down who I was, and once he did, he didn't reach out right away. Instead, he watched from a distance, quietly checking on my life, making sure I was safe before he ever worked up the courage to reach out directly. And then he told everyone something I hadn't expected him to reveal so openly, that over the past several months we had actually been talking. Quiet conversations, late night calls, careful and slow, both of us guarding pieces of our hearts because we'd each been hurt before in ways that made trust feel dangerous. I had kept it private, even from Renee and Yvonne, partly because it felt too fragile to share, and partly, if I'm honest, because some instinct in me knew they wouldn't celebrate it the way real friends should. He talked about the calls where I made him laugh after brutal board meetings, the way I never once asked him for anything despite knowing exactly who he was by then. The way I treated him the same whether he was calling from a private jet or from a quiet night in when he just needed someone to talk to. He said somewhere in those months, what started as gratitude had turned into something he never expected to feel again, something real, something he wasn't willing to lose. The room was completely silent. Even the band had stopped playing. I stood there, tears already slipping down my face, not from humiliation this time, but from something entirely different, something I didn't have a name for yet. And then, in front of every single person who had laughed at me less than an hour earlier, he got down on one knee. He pulled a small box from his jacket, opened it to reveal a ring that caught the light of the entire room, and he looked up at me with an honesty I hadn't seen from anyone in years. He said, "I'm not asking you this because of what I have. I'm asking because of who you are, and because the world needs to see what it looks like when kindness comes back around to find the person who gave it away. Corrine Hale, will you marry me?" I don't remember exactly what I said first, whether it was yes or whether I just nodded because the words wouldn't come out fast enough. I remember saying it eventually, clearly, loud enough for the whole room to hear, yes, through tears that finally meant something good. The room that had been silent erupted into applause and gasps, people pulling out their phones, Priscilla covering her mouth in shock, guests who had barely spoken to me all night suddenly acting as if they had always believed in me. I saw Odell smiling with tears in his own eyes, genuinely happy, the only person in that room whose joy for me had never wavered even in the ugliest moment of the night. And then there was Renee and Yvonne standing frozen near the edge of the crowd. The same women who less than an hour earlier had made a public spectacle of my loneliness, now watching the very thing they mocked me for turn into the most extraordinary moment that room had ever witnessed. I want to tell you that I felt this rush of triumph looking at their faces, some deep satisfaction in seeing them humbled, but honestly what I felt most was clarity. I finally understood in that moment that their cruelty had never actually been about me. It was about their own insecurities, their own fears about being alone, about being unseen, about wondering if they too were enough without a ring or a title to prove it. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone, Renee found me near the coat check, her eyes red, her voice shaking. She tried to apologize, said she never should have laughed, that she'd let Yvonne's energy pull her into being someone she wasn't proud of. I listened to her because I believe people deserve to be heard even when they've hurt you. But I didn't rush to tell her it was okay, because it wasn't, not yet, maybe not for a long time. I told her honestly that I hoped she'd learn something real from that night, not because of who I ended up with, but because of how easily we can wound the people closest to us when we care more about fitting in than standing up. I left that party with Elia's hand in mine, walking past the same people who had made me feel invisible just hours before, and I felt taller than I had felt in years. Not because a billionaire chose me, not because I suddenly had a ring on my finger, but because I had survived a room full of people who tried to convince me my worth was tied to my relationship status, and I had come out the other side still whole, still myself. Still the same woman who stopped for a stranger on a cold night, because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return. I think about that night often, and here's what I've come to understand, the kind of understanding that only comes after you've been humbled and lifted in the same breath. Kindness is never wasted, even when it feels small, even when no one's watching, even when the person receiving it can't repay you in any visible way. And more than that, your timeline is not a tragedy just because it doesn't match everyone else's. Some of us are being prepared quietly, patiently, for something that will only make sense when it finally arrives. If people in your life are laughing at your season, at your patience, at your solitude, understand that they are seeing a chapter, not the whole book. They don't know what's already in motion behind the scenes of your life. They don't know who's watching you build yourself with integrity in the dark, getting ready to introduce themselves to you in the light. If this story touched you, if you've ever been mocked for being patient with your own life, hit that like button right now and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by people who were supposed to love you the most? Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because next week's story might just be the one that speaks directly to what you're going through right now. And whatever season you're in, whatever room you're standing in tonight feeling smaller than you deserve to feel, remember this. Something or someone is still working quietly on your behalf, even in the silence. Don't let anyone's opinion write the ending of your story. Your ending hasn't even started yet.